Hey, Al Scott Horton here for The Future of Freedom, the monthly journal of the Future Freedom Foundation at fff.org/subscribe. Since 1989, FFF has been pushing an uncompromising moral and economic case for peace, individual liberty, and free markets. Sign up now for The Future Freedom, featuring founder and president Jacob Hornberger, as well as Sheldon Richmond, James Bovard, Anthony Gregory, Wendy McElroy, and many more. It's just $25 a year for the print edition, $15 per year to read it online. That's fff.org/subscribe. And tell them Scott sent you.
All right. Well, welcome back. I'm Scott Horton. Our next guest is Phil Giraldi. He is formerly a CIA officer and DIA officer, and now he is editor, contributor, this, that, the other thing, writer for antiwar.com, the American Conservative magazine, as well as uns.com. Well, pretty much just like Eric Margulies. And then also, he's the executive director of the Council for the National Interest at councilforthenationalinterest.org. Welcome back to the show, Phil. How are you doing?
I'm fine, Scott. How about you?
I'm doing good. Appreciate you joining us today. Put on any good conferences lately?
Well, we had one a couple of weeks ago that you attended and spoke at, about reevaluating the Israeli-United States special relationship. I think it was a pretty big success. We had a packed house of over 350 people at the National Press Club, and it was actually on C-SPAN Live, which is a first.
Yeah, that was a really big deal, and I would definitely say a great success. And now, so tell me this, where might people be able to go and see the footage and or hear the audio from this great conference and all the great speeches that were given there?
Well, we're gradually putting them up on the website. It's at natsummit.org. Most of them are up. In fact, all the speeches are up in terms of audio. We have transcripts of nearly all the speeches. If you go to the bios of the 24 speakers, you'll see transcripts of the speeches that they gave. And it's all pretty much there. It should all be completely there in the next day or two.
And there's some really good speeches in there. I mean, all of them were pretty good, but some of them were absolutely great and definitely worth people's time to go and take a look. Again, it was the National Summit to reassess the American-Israel special relationship. It's at natsummit.org, and I think you watched the video on C-SPAN too, cspan.org. I think they still have it there.
Yeah, it's available on C-SPAN. You might have to search a little bit for it, but it's there.
Yeah, it's on there. All right, good deal. Now, I want to start with something that you said on the phone earlier when I was calling you to see if you could do the show today, and that was that you were talking with a mutual friend of ours who's been going to some kind of conservative meetings around Washington, D.C., and he's been learning some terrifying things. Like what?
Yeah, well, this is a good friend of mine, and you know him too, who's a long-time traditional conservative, and he attends all these weekly gatherings that conservative groups like Grover Norquist and others have, and he says it's absolutely frightening what's going on. He says that it's the bloodlust that seems to be currently out and visible and audible over confronting Russia is astonishing. And he says that in some ways he almost thinks it's worse than it was before Iraq.
Now, I got to wonder about that because, when I think back to 2001, 2002, and early 2003 in that era, and the not just lying us into war, but intimidating us into war, sure seems like Washington, D.C., they were either gung-ho fully on board, or they were at least intimidated first among all of us in the whole country, and seemed, I can't imagine the pressure that somebody like Grover Norquist was under. I know he's much more fiscal conservative than any kind of imperialist ideologue, and I don't know if he was really for Iraq or not, but I'm sure that he didn't have much choice in supporting it at the time, Yeah,
well, Grover actually was not supportive of the Iraq War, and he takes fairly moderate positions on many foreign policy issues. But I think what my friend is saying is that he's astonished by the level of this anger that seems to be surfacing. Recollections of what it was like back in 2003. It was a lot different. In fact, this friend of mine and I, for the only time in our lives, marched at peace demonstrations in Washington. So it was different. There's no question about it. But I think what's really surprised him is just, why this issue has caught fire. I mean, why are all the leading newspapers calling for aggressive steps against Russia? Why are all of the talking heads? Well, we expect that. Why the politicians are all on board of this? I mean, it's just it makes no sense. We have no reason to be doing this. We don't have to approve of what Russia does. We don't have to approve of Putin. But the fact is that it's a sovereign country, and what it's doing, it has plausible reasons to be doing. And the fact that we want to get involved in the middle of this is just insanity.
Yeah, it's funny because it seems like, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess I'll ask you, what you think all the different incentives are. It seems to me like one incentive that ought to be in play would be, especially among some of these older, maybe former secretaries of state and things like that, that they could play cool, graybeard, easy there, tiger, cooler heads prevail type of a role in this thing. Maybe a Baker, a Scowcroft, or somebody. I guess Kissinger wrote something about everybody calm down a little bit. But for the most part, it seems like there's been very little of that. And I guess I don't understand why not. It seems like there would be, at least some of these people would think that's the reputation that they want for their own future, that they're the wise man for later on, after Brzezinski dies or whatever.
Yeah, well, the funny thing is a lot of this agitation is coming from Democrats. It's coming from, there was a piece in the Washington Post 2 days ago by Madeleine Albright calling for aggressive steps. There was Sandy Berger about 2 weeks ago had a similar piece. I mean, if there ever was a failed foreign policy, it was under Bill Clinton, and which we've unfortunately continued ever since then. But the fact is, he started all this stuff, and so they're calling for confronting Russia, and of course we have the progressive interventionists that are in the administration right now. Susan Rice, it's these people, and I'm just doing a little research on the ambassador who just left, the U.S. ambassador who just left Russia, McFaul. And this guy was a democracy promoter put in as ambassador to Moscow. I mean, what kind of sense does this stuff make?
Yeah, well, it's not like they have any H-bombs anymore, right? Or do they?
Only about 800 of them.
I mean, it's not like America would use nukes if the Russians were busily working to overthrow our government and they put our government's back up against the wall, a situation like that, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, we're the only nation in history to use nukes.
Yeah, I mean, I can see the mushroom clouds now. I can feel the heat from them.
Yep.
All right, now, so now here's the thing about it. It seems like, for Berger and Albright, for example, that you mentioned there, the Clintonites who really, pushed this expand NATO policy for whatever reasons, is it now that they just can't admit that, well, geez, if this is a problem, then that means I got us into it, and I can't admit that, so I gotta just double down? Is it that obvious and that simple?
Well, to me, I mean, being an adult about these issues, if you make a mistake, and in retrospect it was a mistake, you admit it. But you're right. I mean, our ruling class in this country can never admit that it's made a mistake. I mean, how few of the people who pushed for the Iraq War, for example, have said it was a mistake? I think you can count them on the two fingers of one hand. And that's about it. And it's just absolutely amazing that these terrible policies continue, and the people who coined the policies or are the architects of the policies can never seemingly admit that they did something wrong. I mean, it's just you even go back to the Balkans and everything, how screwed up that was, and bombing Serbia and everything. None of these policies were thought through to the point that they made any sense, and they don't make any sense now.
Yeah. Well, and I'll contradict myself too about the consensus, because at least, well, no, I mean, it's still right. It's the exceptions that prove the rule, but they're pretty powerful exceptions in the media lately. I'm thinking of Jack Matlock, the former ambassador to the USSR, who wrote in the Washington Post and was on this show, as well as Leslie Gelb, who is a former president of the Council on Foreign Relations and helped Dan Ellsberg write the Pentagon Papers back when, and is, very influential sort of mini Brzezinski type among the Democrats, as best I can tell. And then, of course, Paul Pillar has written some stuff like this, former leader at the National Intelligence Council there. saying, hey, guys, let's at least tell the truth about what's going on here. Whoa. We don't want to have our relationship with Russia based on policies that really are based on the narrative that we're saying on TV here, right? And there's supposed to be a difference between lying and believing your own lie. And when it comes to our relationship with Russia, we can't afford to be dishonest about what happened here. We sort of kind of picked this fight, okay? That kind of thing. So I don't know if that's really getting through, but it's sort of, in fact, it probably isn't, and it's a measure of how desperate somebody like Leslie Gell would be to write something like that. To say, hey, guys, come on, can we please get back to basing our discussion of what to do on the real facts of the matter instead of just what we're telling the rubes, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's crazy. All right, well, I'm sorry I talked us all the way to the damn break. Now, we're talking with Phil Giraldi from the Council for the National Interest and Antiwar.com and the American Conservative and all that. We'll be back in just a sec. Hey, Scott Horton here to tell you about this great new book by Michael Swanson, The War State. In The War State, Swanson examines how Presidents Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy both expanded and fought to limit the rise of the new national security state after World War II. If this nation is ever to live up to its creed of liberty and prosperity for everyone, we are going to have to abolish the empire. Know your enemy. Get The War State by Michael Swanson. It's available at your local bookstore or at Amazon.com in Kindle or in paperback. Just click the book in the right margin at scotthorton.org or thewarstate.com. All right, y'all, welcome back to the show. I'm Scott Horton. This is my show, The Scott Horton Show. And we got Phil Giraldi on the line here. He writes for the American Conservative Magazine and Antiwar.com. And UNS.com. They're running a lot of great stuff over there at UNS.com. And I guess I'll go ahead and ask you about this now because I want to get back to Ukraine in a second. Well, no, let's do Ukraine and then I'll ask you about this. UNS, I'm writing a note to myself here. Ukraine. So there's a lot of things about Ukraine worth discussing, but one thing that I wonder whether you saw this and what you think it really means, maybe if you could explain the relative power of these groups and how much it may matter, if it does matter. This article that I saw here about how the Svoboda Party is building a very close relationship with Germany's neo-Nazi NPD party. And the German Nazis, they approve very strongly of America's regime change over there in Ukraine. I was wondering if you could just talk about, I guess, maybe what you know about the regime change and how important is this? Is this what it looks like? Did I just say that the German Nazis are in on this with us now?
Well, there obviously been a lot of there's been a lot of reporting that it's true that one of the coalition parties in the interim Ukrainian government is neo-Nazi. It's a fascist party, and clearly they have connections with other fascist parties in Europe, just because that's the way these things work. And so I mean, it's like, well, you remember all the denial that was going on about Al Qaeda type terrorists being connected with the insurgency in Syria. I think we're seeing the same sort of thing, where obviously these groups who are organized, have money, have connections all across Europe, are a lot stronger than their numbers might indicate. And this is the horse we're backing. John McCain put his arm around the leader of the party when he made one of his notorious visits to Maidan Square. So it's the kind of things you get caught up in because you don't understand what's going on in these places, and these people are manipulating you. That's exactly what happens.
Yeah, I saw where people are complaining, Ukrainians are complaining. They're like, hey, nobody really likes these guys. It's the American intervention and for example, the deal brokered by the European Union that really gave them enhanced power. And then I'm trying to remember who it was. It might have been in a comment section where somebody was saying everybody thinks that they can use the fascists to get their little dirty work done, but that it's not going to be a threat. But that's not how it usually works out in history, man. These guys are fanatical, and they've won themselves now, and I don't know how much popular support they really do have, but they've won something around the order of 8 major positions in the new government, including, I'm not exactly sure, but I think the Secretary of Defense and the head of the National Police and the top attorney general and all of this, right?
Yeah, they have serious leverage over the government, and they, as you say, they have 8 senior positions in the government, and so it's like, all right, we don't know what these guys represent. Maybe they're being misrepresented by the media too, but it's one of these situations you don't know what's going on, and you're backing people because of some ideological agenda you have, and it's a recipe for disaster, and it's a recipe for disaster over and over again. And what makes this one particularly bad is the fact that the confrontation is with Russia, and Russia is a serious, major military power. And it's like, why are we seeing this? God.
Yeah. Well, it goes back to what you're saying about the conversation, especially among conservatives. Where you have a window into the conversation in Washington, D.C. I wonder, is anyone, even John McCain said there are no military options here. Come on, nukes are nukes, right? So, they realize there's some kind of limit, but they don't seem to realize where it is, right? They sure do seem to push too far. This latest push being the best example of that, and then they want to act surprised about Crimea, but they're not really.
Yeah, well, the thing is, McCain and these others are saying there's no military option because there is no military option. We don't have the resources in that part of the world to actually do anything militarily, and he knows that, and anybody who looks at the situation knows it. But they're quite willing to push Russia into a corner by every other means, sanctions, declaring the Russian leaders to be war criminals, the whole baggage of things that they tend to do. They're quite willing to put Russia into a corner and expect that Russia's not going to react. That's what's so crazy about this. It's not. I don't expect nukes are going to be flying next week or anything like that. But the fact is that there are consequences every time you create these kinds of situations where you're putting somebody else on the defensive and you're increasing the pressure like we do with Iran. And their consequences are that you can't really get out of the box yourself. You're trapped in by your own rhetoric. You're trapped in by what you're doing to the other guy. And I think this is what's awful about these situations. Instead of sitting back and reasonably addressing the issues and talking about the issues, they just want to go ballistic every time.
Yeah. All right. Well, so what if Putin decided to really call the bluff and invade the Baltics? Would they? Those are already NATO members, those countries, or even, I guess you could answer if you want about what if he invades East Ukraine or all of Ukraine. But what if he went ahead and called our bluff on NATO and Eastern Europe altogether and said, enough of this. You want to defend Germany, fine, but, this part of Europe is our backyard and your alliance is now null and void. What would they do then? Would that be a nuclear war, or would they back down, or what do you think?
Well, I think first of all, I don't think Putin has any kind of ambition like that. But the fact is that if that scenario were to play out, I think NATO would be obligated to defend the 3 countries there, and it could be nuclear war. And that's why this stuff is scary. It's real world scary that we pushed the borders of NATO right up to Russia. It would have been fine to, bring these countries into the European Union because that's essentially an economic union and a political union. But to push a military alliance up to the doorstep of a country that you had promised not to do this, it's crazy. All of this stuff has been crazy.
Yeah. That guy Matlock, Jack Matlock, the former ambassador, his piece in the Washington Post said America's been a bully this whole time, kicking them while they're down this whole time for 20 years instead of being a good sport about it. We whooped them in the Cold War. Their empire fell apart, and then we do nothing but persecute them and humiliate them and degrade them. And then we're, and as you're saying, push right up to their borders and then act like, oh, no, history began the other day as soon as, their troops left their bases on the Crimean Peninsula. And never mind anything leading up to that.
The research I was just doing on this Ambassador McFaul, he met with opposition. As soon as he arrived in Moscow, he met with opposition politicians before he even presented his credentials at the foreign ministry. He was sending a signal that we're with the opposition. how does an ambassador from a major power do that to another major power and expect that there are no consequences? This kind of stuff is just, it is so crazy, Scott. I can't even believe it. I have a feeling like I'm just going to go crazy at some point because I don't understand this anymore.
It is. It's madness. I mean, even with John Kerry running the State Department, still, it's almost unbelievable that could be true. All right, well, hell, now we don't have that much time, but I want to ask you about Turkey because we talked before about how, you let them have democracy in Turkey. They elect conservative Islamists, and that's what Erdogan is. And the young and the high-tech and the people that live in the city, they're, the Turkish version of the Democrats, basically, and they may not like it, and they may throw a big protest, but he really does have majority support. But then, things sure don't look like it on CNN nowadays. I don't know. What is going on?
Well, he's basically gone a little nuts. What's coming up is local elections on Sunday, and the two biggest prizes are Ankara and Istanbul, and Istanbul is by far the biggest prize. It looks like his party is going to lose in Istanbul. Erdogan was mayor of Istanbul, so that's one of his bases of support, and it looks like he's going to lose it. That kind of changes everything in Turkey. It means that Erdogan will not be able to run for president in September, and it means that his party will be back on its heels. The guy is basically, he's gone in a way crazy in terms of trying to suppress the opposition to him, which is every time he does something, it grows. He closed down Twitter a couple days ago. He's against the internet. He's done a lot of things that are making people very nervous about what he represents.
Picked a fight with Syria.
Yeah. He shot down a Syrian plane that was inside Syria, apparently. But he's doing that as a diversion. And so the thing is, the guy it shows the downside of electing people that run basically on a religious agenda, because his support is essentially religious. His supporters are the peasants in the countryside who are deeply religious but don't really think seriously about other issues. And, how this will play out in Turkey, I don't know. The Turks are very tough, very hard-minded people, and this can go in a lot of different directions.
Well, so now what about the National Endowment for Democracy and or the CIA in Turkey? I mean, they would prefer the old secular military dictatorship to any kind of elected religious conservative like him, wouldn't they? Yeah,
they would. I don't think Ned is operating there because the Turks probably would not permit that. And having been in the CIA in that country, I could assure you that CIA is being very careful about what it does because the Turkish security services are very good.
So you don't think this is a color-coded revolution in a way here?
No, I don't think so. I don't think we have that kind of leverage, and I don't think that we're involved at that kind of level.
All right. They'd like to try, but they just don't figure they could get away with it, you think?
Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to put it.
All right. Well, and now I'd save till we got no time whatsoever, hardly left, for you to address this. But did you see the 5-part series by Patrick Coburn about the next generation of suicide bomber Al-Qaedaites in Libya, Syria, etc.? And what do you think of it? Overstated, understated, big deal?
I think it's overstated a bit because, you got to tell a story. But the fact is, I think his facts are certainly credible insofar as I was aware of the background to them. And it was very, very good, very well done.
Yeah, well, that's really too bad. I really like his journalism, too. I think he does a great job. Unfortunately, that means what he writes is accurate and what he writes is horrible. But there you go.
Yeah,
right,
I know, exactly.
That's Phil Giraldi, everybody. Antiwar.com. Appreciate it. We're out of time.
Thanks, Scott.
Don't worry about things you can't control. Isn't that what they always say? But it's about impossible to avoid worrying about what's going on these days. The government has used the war on guns, the war on drugs, and the war on terrorism to tear our Bill of Rights to shreds. But you can fight back. The 10th Amendment Center has proven it, racking up major victories. For example, when the U.S. government claimed authority in the NDAA to have the military kidnap and detain Americans without trial, the nullifiers got a law passed in California, declaring the state's refusal to ever participate in any such thing. Their latest project is offnow.org, nullifying the National Security Agency. They've already gotten model legislation introduced in California, Arizona, Oklahoma, Missouri, and Kansas, meant to limit the power of the NSA to spy on Americans in those states. We'd be fools to wait around for the U.S. Congress or courts to roll back Big Brother. Our best chance is nullification and interposition on the state level. Go to offnow.org, print out that model legislation, and get to work nullifying the NSA. The hero Edward Snowden has risked everything to give us this chance. Let's take it. Offnow.org. Hey, y'all, Scott Horton here for WallStreetWindow.com. Mike Swanson is a successful former hedge fund manager who provides his subscribers with a very real window into his investments, updating them on every move he makes in the markets. Right now, Mike's anticipating a bear and is dumping all his stocks while the getting is good, investing instead in gold and the commodities. Protect your assets and learn the wise ways of the markets. WallStreetWindow.com. And check out Mike Swanson's great contribution to the history of the rise of the American empire and the war state. Available at scotthorton.org/Amazon. Hey y'all, Scott Horton here for CashIntoCoins.com. So you want to buy some Bitcoins? CashIntoCoins.com makes it fast, easy, and safe to get Bitcoins. Just deposit the money into their account at any of the major banks they support, and then just email them a picture of the receipt and your Bitcoin address, and you get your Bitcoins. Almost always the same day it clears. In a tough, competitive new market, CashIntoCoins.com has the advantage. A great system and great customer service to keep you coming back. That's CashIntoCoins.com. Just click the link in the right margin at scotthorton.org. Hey y'all, Scott here. Man, I had a chance to have an essay published in the book Why Peace, edited by Mark Gutman, but I didn't understand what an opportunity it was. Boy, do I regret I didn't take it. This compendium of thoughts by the greatest anti-war writers and activists of our generation will be remembered and studied long into the future. You've got to get Why Peace. You've got to read Why Peace. It features articles by Harry Brown, Robert Naiman, Fred Bronfman, Dahlia Wasfy, Richard Cummings, Karen Kotowski, Butler Schaefer, Kathy Kelly, Robert Higgs, Anthony Gregory, and so many more. Why Peace? Because war is the health of everything wrong with our society. Get Why Peace down at the bookshop or Amazon.com. Just click the book in the right margin at scotthorton.org.